Welcome to the How of Business with your host, Henry Lopez, the podcast that helps you start, run, and grow your small business. And now, here is your host.
Welcome to this episode of the How of Business. This is Henry Lopez, and my guest today is JP Humphrey. JP, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to this conversation. I'll explain in a moment how I came to know JP, but he's going to share briefly, we're going to talk about his career journey, how he got to where he is today in the commercial real estate business. And then we're going to touch on some insights and tips at a high level, kind of from an overview perspective on commercial real estate for small business owners. It's a topic that I haven't covered in quite some time. And so had the opportunity to have JP come on and help me through some of this and answer some questions for me. So if you want to receive more information about the How of Business, including the show notes page for this episode, and to schedule a free coaching consultation with me, just visit thehowofbusiness.com. So let me tell you about JP. JP Humphrey is a commercial real estate agent in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. JP joined Advisors Commercial Real Estate in 2017, and he's an associate in their Dallas-Fort Worth office. He specializes in single-tenant building sales and project leasing for office and medical office properties. His experience also includes tenant representation. We're going to talk about what that means and why that's so important. And JP has held his Texas real estate license since he was a senior in high school. JP has been recognized as a top broker and a power broker by local publications for the past 3 years in a row. As an Arlington, Texas native, he strongly believes in giving back to his community. He's actively involved with several local charities. So JP lives in Arlington, Texas, which is a suburb kind of in between Dallas and Fort Worth. And so once again, JP Humphrey, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here again, and looking forward to kind of getting into the commercial real estate world. Answering any questions that you guys might have, and just kind of providing some clarity on the full process.
Sure, absolutely. And so just to show a little bit more with listeners, the way I came to know JP is your dad and I have known each other for quite some time. We met in when would it have been? It would have been mid to late 90s. We worked together at Lawson Software. So I've known your dad for quite some time. And I had a chance to have him on the show back on episode 385, where we talked about Connect for Life. So if you're interested in that, go back and listen to episode 385. But just to kind of get up to speed, you, as far as I can remember, being around your life on the periphery, you've been interested in real estate. And of course, your dad has been investing in real estate for quite some time. Is that how you got exposed to it and interested in the whole world of real estate?
Yes and no. Kind of give you guys a little bit of background. I actually got pretty interested in commercial real estate going into my senior year of high school. We traditionally in high school would typically go on a summer vacation. There was a few years where we vacationed with a couple other families that went to school with us, and one of the families in particular, the father there was very into commercial development. Really didn't go to college. Had a construction background and kind of got started into the business that way. And he'd sat us down. I was reading Rich Dad Poor Dad at the time. Some of you may know that book, and was just kind of getting very interested in the thought of recurring revenue, having tenants basically assist you with paying down your debt and increasing the principal that you own, and the equity that you own, if you will. So, really got interested in there. I had unfortunately torn my ACL playing football for the second time, and was looking at a 6 to 9 month recovery process. This was in June or July, going into my senior year, 2012, which I graduated in 2013. So I had a little bit of downtime. I knew I wasn't going to be playing football, in the season coming up. So I figured this is what I wanted to do, post college, and I took that opportunity to go ahead and get my real estate license here in Texas. So
you studied real estate in college, right?
Correct. Yes. The University of Arkansas has a real estate concentration in the finance program. So that was one of my primary decisions in ultimately choosing the University of Arkansas. I studied finance with a concentration in real estate, and then I got an accounting minor as well.
It's fantastic. Yeah. So, as you may know, maybe you don't recall, but in the early 2000s, I had my real estate license as well, but I focused on residential. And similar to what you do, what I enjoyed about it, and part of it is really like having your own business, because while you work under obviously the guidance and rules of a broker in an office, it's up to you to go get the business or not get the business, right? So it's very much entrepreneurial is my thought. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's exactly like that. I mean, I always tell people I am my own boss. There's some truth behind that. Yes, I do, work under a brokerage umbrella, and, there are certain things that we have to follow, rules, and, working as a team with property managers on accounts that we, manage, and, also external property managers and owners as well. But yeah, it is an eat and kill what you eat. You eat what you kill
Yeah.
type of business. If you have a hard time, getting yourself out of bed and, getting going and making the calls, it's a tough business to succeed in.
Yeah. You've been at it for a few years now. What's one thing you enjoy about it the most?
Definitely. Well, the deal making process is just so much fun. I really love the back and forth, the negotiations, the coaching with assisting with your landlords and sellers on the advising portion of the process is a lot of fun, and then also just meeting the people is great as well.
Yeah, that's what I enjoyed about it as well, and everybody that I talked to, it's one of those careers slash business. Every day is a different challenge. You're out there in the field, you're meeting different people. Every transaction is unique, so that has a lot of appeal. All right, let's dive into it, JP. And I want to take this from the perspective, obviously, of a small business owner, either someone who's planning to start a business that's going to require a physical space, retail space, perhaps, or maybe a warehouse, whatever it might be. And also for someone who might have an existing business, maybe they're looking to renegotiate or move to a bigger space or whatever the case might be. So that's a perspective that I want to take. So giving that context, from your perspective, why should I consider a commercial agent? Why not just go drive around, identify where I want to have the space, and just call off the signs and go about it that way? Why should I look to engage someone like you? And we'll talk in a moment about tenant representation, but give me at a high level, what is it that a commercial agent brings to the process?
Well, there's a couple of items, that particularly come to mind. One of them is, the access to market information. There are free websites and versions of, searching commercial space. LoopNet is one of them, one of the free tools that's available for the public to use. One thing that, a lot of people probably don't know is that LoopNet only will put out the information on properties that have a certain level of payment, if you will, for a certain particular coverage. You have to have a certain amount of coverage, otherwise your property will not show up on the basic. So access to property information, market information is important. If you were just going around driving or searching yourself, there may be a few properties that get left out that you might be interested in potentially. There's knowledge of the process. The small business owner and the business owner, they're experts at what they do. Commercial agent in the same sense is an expert at what they do. They do this every day. A small business owner may have been through this a couple of times. If they're signing a 3 to 5 year lease, they're dealing with this every 3 to 5 years. Longer if they sign a longer term lease. But your commercial agent typically do this multiple times. Last year I think I did 40 deals, and the year before that I signed 50. So you just get a lot more knowledge and experience. Not everything always goes according to plan on a deal, and that's typically when your commercial agent is most valuable in dealing with those situations where there's a lot of problem solving and trying to get creative on solutions. Kind of goes into the next point, which would be experience with negotiations. Typically, you'll have a lawyer review a lease prior to signing. As a broker, we do not give legal advice. Yeah, something we're required to say, but we will look over the release, review everything, and if there's some deal points that stick out to us, those are something that we bring to attention and assist with negotiating.
Yeah, all great points. And I think the other thing that sometimes I find people don't realize is that commercial agents, as far as how you get paid, it's the same as with a residential agent that you might hire to buy or sell a house. In other words, the landlord pays your commission. If I, as a business owner, hire you to help me, hire as in quotations, I don't pay for that. And so it makes all that much more sense why I should bring on your expertise, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that's something that gets overlooked a lot, especially a smaller business owner who maybe hasn't gone through the process before. The landlord is responsible for paying, both the landlord representative and the tenant representation as well. And, the fees are very dependent on what market you are and on what standard there. But, ultimately it's free for the tenant to use. And, the tenant representative, their job is to make recommendations and help through the process. Ultimately, the business owner makes the ultimate decision. And, if there's a disagreement on what advice is being offered, the business owner is ultimately the one that gets to make that decision. But it doesn't cost them anything to get that advice.
That's right. All right. So let's clarify what you're touching on as well, which is this whole concept of what's called tenant representation. And the way I always explain it to people, and I find that it's a big source of confusion, is, again, as I had laid out the scenario, if I start calling the signs that are in, let's say I'm looking for, I don't know, 2,000 square feet in a shopping center. And usually there's a sign somewhere that says, for leasing information, call Henry. And so I call that number. And what I'm calling is I'm calling the representative or the broker for the landlord. And by law, they're required to treat me fairly and give me the information, and they'll even help me with leasing space. But what they are not is my exclusive representation or representative from the negotiation process. And that's where tenant representation comes into play. But explain it to me a little bit further in your words. You act often as a tenant representative. So explain at a high level how that works.
The process starts, the ideal process starting point would be, the tenant has engaged you prior to doing any searching of their own. So from that point, we would meet with the tenant, determine what their needs for the space were, whether we were talking about a retail space, an office flex space, office space, what kind of quality building do they want to do? What kind of budget are they working with? Do they need more of an open concept, or do they need, more private offices? Just kind of getting an overview of the tenant and how they operate as a business, and then working on a solution from a space perspective on what fits that the best. So, our role during that process is to identify options based on the criteria that we've been given from the business owner. And based on that geographic parameter, and the other, criteria that go into it, price per foot on the budget, size of the space that they need, maybe they have a higher density use, such as a call center, and they're worried about parking. Their office building, not every office building is created equally when it comes to parking. Some have a higher parking ratio than others, and that is something that would need to be taken into that process during the search. So, once we identified a couple of locations, usually you want 3 to 5 that you like, you would probably send out LOIs on 3 of those, and you would begin negotiating that process. Typically, I would say it takes 3 to 4 weeks to negotiate the LOIs. And then once you have reached, pretty much your business points on the LOI, then you would, go to lease and work through the lease. Your broker is going to assist you with the business points, and working with the lawyer that you would hire to review the lease if you choose to do so, on working through that lease. And then once you signed the lease, you would commence build out if there was any renovations that needed to be taken place. And then once your build out was finished, you would submit for your certificate of occupancy with the city, and then you would be ready to roll.
Excellent. Thanks for that overview. Going back to the tenant representation, how do I know that you are representing me exclusively? How do I know that, and how do I ensure that?
And are you speaking in the sense in which you have hired me as your tenant representation, and not
Correct.
that you're dealing with an intermediary on a landlord representation assignment?
Correct.
Well,
I mean, when obviously in real estate, in my experience, what I do with a commercial agent is I sign a tenant representation agreement that makes that very clear. Is that what you typically do and recommend?
You can do that. You know, a lot of the times we really just do it verbally on a handshake type agreement. You know, the tenant representation agreements are really more put in place to protect the commercial real estate agent than they are the actual small business owner. You know, that basically locks you into to an agreement with a tenant representation or a tenant representative that, you know, they're going to put in, you know, quite a bit of time and work into this deal before they, you know, ever realize the fruits of the labor. You know, it could be 9 months. Sometimes it could be longer. You know, sometimes it could be shorter if there's you know, move-in ready type space.
Right.
But in my experience, you know, those representation agreements are really more to protect the broker than they are the small business.
Sure, I can see it. I mean, I can see where it goes both ways. The point is that I want people to take away is that you want to be clear on who your agent is representing. And in my opinion, I don't like it when the agent that I'm working with is in an intermediary position, because then they don't have the responsibility to me as my agent. And
Correct.
so that's my recommendation. You would agree with that, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, let's move on. I would like you another term that I want to introduce and explain and define for people, because it's another source of confusion, is the whole concept that typically, generally, not always, but in my experience, it always has been the case that when I go to lease commercial space, it's through what's called, generally speaking, I've always heard it referred to as a triple net lease, which means at a high level that I'm going to pay the rent, which is likely going to increase over the period of time, not necessarily, but depends on what got negotiated. But then I'm also paying my pro rata share based on the amount of space I have in that center or building, or maybe I have the whole building, my portion of the real estate taxes for that property, the common area maintenance, that is my share for the maintaining the property, the landscaping, the lighting, those kind of things, and the insurance. So those three things are what get referred to as the triple nets. Am I missing anything on that? Is there anything you would add to explaining what a triple net lease is?
No, you pretty much hit it. There's just a few other things that kind of go into it that are negotiable. It really depends on what type of a property you're in. But for instance, in a retail type center, you know, a lot of the times the landlord will put the HVAC system, you know, repairs certainly, and then a lot of the times replacement as well onto the tenant. It's outside of a triple net. You know, what goes into your triple nets, the taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, but it is another expense that a tenant has to bear.
Yeah, great point. Including, I agree often, at least all the leases I've signed, I agree to have to maintain that HVAC system at my expense. In other words, it's my responsibility during the time of the lease, whether I like it or not. And that leads me, JP, to the whole other thing that I think sometimes is kind of hard to process for people, that when I lease space, typically I'm responsible for everything inside the box, if you will, right? They're going to tell me the roof doesn't leak and the walls don't have penetration, but otherwise I'm responsible for everything inside the box, right?
Correct. Yeah, the landlord will typically take care of the structural, the roof, and the foundation, and then, you know, a lot of the other items are negotiable. It really just depends on how the landlord is running his property. and how hard the tenant wants to push on certain items.
Right. And let's get into that, because I think that's really then, after understanding the basics of how this works, understanding that you want your own representation, if at all possible, understanding at a high level what a triple net lease is. You've touched on it. You said it, it's negotiable. All of the terms, well, most of the terms that are terms or clauses in a lease are negotiable. Now, that doesn't mean you will get it negotiated in your favor. A lot of factors come into play: market conditions, demand for that particular piece of property, all kinds of factors, my credit worthiness or history or experience. All of these things come to play in my ability to negotiate. So no, in my experience, and I'm sure yours, in the 40 transactions you did last year, every situation is different. So just take these as kind of guidelines on things that you should have a discussion about. But you touched on HVAC as a big one. That's another one. That's one that always comes up for me is, if I'm responsible for it, well, then will you at least certify it that it's in working condition? Those kind of things are important to negotiate. Tenant improvements you touched on as well, which are, will the landlord help me with the finish out that needs to happen before I can say, put my restaurant in there, right? And so in my experience, not all, but most landlords are willing to work with you on some kind of a participation on tenant improvement. Is that what you're still seeing these days, or enlighten me on that?
That's correct. And then there was one other thing I really kind of wanted to mention on the HVAC, which a lot of landlords, will bend on, and that is first of all, I think you touched on it, making sure it's delivered in good and working condition, and they warranty it for the first 180 days of the lease. That'll help you out with getting started, making sure you don't get hit with a $10,000 HVAC replacement expense in your first year of business. That's an important thing to ask for. If the landlord if you cannot get the negotiation of the replacement on the landlord, a lot of landlords will accept an HVAC deductible, and that can be negotiated a couple of ways. You could do it, on a per calendar year for all of the units. You could do it on a per unit basis. And then I would also, just make sure I would suggest getting an HVAC report on the age and condition of the units prior to signing the lease.
Yeah. All right.
But to answer, getting your question about tenant improvements, yes, a lot of landlords will, well, not a lot, just about all of the landlords will offer some sort of an incentive. And, that'll come in a couple of different forms. It could come in the form of actual tenant improvement allowance dollars, which the landlord would reimburse to the tenant once they have received, all the lien releases from the contractor and everything in the work order was satisfied. It could come in the form of free rent, where, the landlord says, okay, I'm not really going to give you guys any actual dollars for the improvements up front, but I might give you 4 months of free rent. On the retail properties, a lot of that free rent will come in the form of abated base rent, where you are still paying the triple nets during those, however many months you negotiate. And then on an office building, a lot of the times, those are plus electric or a full service type lease, and you're getting actual free rent outside of maybe a prorated utility bill during that time period. And then you could have a combination of the both. You may have a couple of months of free rent, maybe have a few months of half rent, and then maybe you have a small tenant improvement allowance. And a lot of that will go into the credit worthiness of the tenant themselves and the landlord's underwriting of their financials, the length of term you're willing to sign, and then the rate that you guys ultimately agree on, all kind of go into how that package is structured.
Yeah. All right. Great stuff there. Great points on the free rent. One of the things that has worked for me sometimes in the past, JP, is that, let's say I wanted 6 free weeks, or 6 free months rather, and the landlord pushes back. I have found success with, maybe they'll give me 3 in that first year, but then 1 free month every year for the remainder of the lease. In other words, I have found that landlords are much more willing to sometimes give it to me later in the lease, once I've shown that I'm paying and that I'm a good tenant. Have you found that to be the case in your experience?
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of that also kind of goes into, landlord, they want to start getting their money coming in just as soon as possible.
Right,
So
right.
they can stagger that free rent over the course of a 5-year lease. They're maybe missing 1 month of rent every year, as opposed to having the first year of lease term where they have maybe 6 months out of that year where they're not getting any income. Now, a lot of things, one thing I have seen, just about all the landlords I work with on the landlord representation side is we will add that however many free months of rent you get, we'll add that onto the term. So, if you negotiated a 5-year deal and you got 4 months free, it would be a 64-month lease instead of a 60-month lease.
Right, right. I've seen that as well. Fair enough. All right. Another big clause that I wanted to touch on is the personal guarantee. And that's another, often when I work with first-time business owners, it's one of those shocking moments when you realize that signing that 5-year lease, you are personally guaranteeing it. And even if the business fails, even if it was under an LLC or a corporation, me, Henry Lopez, still personally said, I'm going to cover that rent until they're able to lease it back out. That's a huge potential burden. But what I have been able to negotiate in some instances is a burnout or a phase out of that guarantee. Let's say it was a 5-year lease, and maybe I'm able to negotiate that after year 3, it goes down to 50% and then it phases out. Are you seeing that recently? Is that something you see in the Dallas market?
Yep. Yeah, we call it a rolling guarantee here. But yeah, that is, we do see that quite a bit. And a lot of times, the stronger the tenant's financials are, the better terms they can get on when that will roll off. And a lot of it also goes into well, how much money is the landlord putting into the deal? How much improvement dollars are they putting into the deal? When are they going to recoup all of that? And a lot of the times, your rolling guarantee will be structured around when those are recouped, and then also depending on the financials as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We've touched on quite a few clauses. I just want to kind of rattle off a few other ones and then ask you what else we should be thinking about at a high level. Obviously, there's the term of the lease. In my experience, I've always kind of leaned towards a 5-year, maybe a 10-year with an option. But the thing I find that often people make a mistake on, JP, with the option is it's not really an option. It's just kind of, well, we will mutually agree to an extension at the end and it'll be at market rate. To me, that's not an option. So what I've always tried to do, and again, I may not get it, but I'm going to try to get it, is a definitive option with some kind of parameters around what rent will go up to in that option at my option. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we've seen that. I tend to see that more on retail than I do on the office, but we've seen that quite a bit. Where the renewal term can't exceed more than 110% of the previous year's rate. I've seen that quite a bit. I've seen tenants try to put a renewal option at 90 or 95% market rate, trying to get a little bit of a discount there for being a longer term tenant. I see a lot. Well, most landlords will push back on that and put it back at 100% on the market rate, and then you'll negotiate it during that renewal process. Now, on a lot of our renewals, especially in our medical office buildings and office buildings, you want to be fair to the tenant on the renewal. So a lot of times you will keep them at that same rate that they're paying right now for at least another year before you start bumping them again.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Fair enough. Great. Thanks for that. Thanks for those tips. That's another great way to potentially lock in some kind of lock on what that rate is going to be. Otherwise, it really is up to the landlord as to how badly they want to keep me or not. Last one I want to touch on is lease assignment. So where I've had this come into play is when I've sold the business and I've got a lease in place, and I've had everything from, oh yeah, it's just, trivial fees, to one time I had to pay $15,000 just for the privilege of their attorneys to, agree to the assignment, which I thought was just horrible. I had inherited that clause because it was a business that I had bought and then sold. So that's something I look for as well, that there should be it has to be spelled out, but some ease and not any big arbitrary fee related to me assigning my lease. What are your thoughts on that?
I think $15,000 to assign a lease is pretty egregious.
It is. It is. It was egregious, but I, there it was, right?
That's unfortunate. A lot of times I will see that the landlord doesn't have an issue. It's just subject to approval of the assignee's financials. And, as long as they are somewhat in line with the financials that the assigning tenant, has, the landlord will move forward on that. Just because they're assigning the lease doesn't mean that they're released of all liability. A lot of landlords will tend to keep the assigner on the guarantee, and also put the assignee on have them sign a personal guarantee. So from the landlord's perspective, two is better than one. I've seen that a lot.
Yeah. That's a
and
good
then
point.
as
I
far
had to
as,
do that on a business that I sold. I had to do that for a period of time. So yeah, that's very
Yep.
common.
Yeah. And then, as far as a fee for writing the paperwork up, I haven't seen $15,000. 1,500 is, probably the maximum I've seen for something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, we'll start to wrap it up. I got a million more questions, but time here is coming to an end, so we'll probably have to see if we can convince you to come back on. Let me summarize this on as far as the the clauses rather, and the terms. You touched it on it a couple times, but in my experience, what I recommend is, you said, one of your functions, your roles is to help me with this negotiation process. You're helping me because you're the broker between the two sides, if you will. The middleman kind of diminishes it, but you understand that you're that hopefully at least emotionally third party disconnected that's helping me transact this back and forth, which can be emotional sometimes and stressful. You're also bringing to bear your market knowledge. What have you seen? What's typical? What's not? What should I expect? So you're helping me with that. But then, as you touched on, in my experience, at some point you might want to hire an attorney, but definitely you want to hire an attorney before you sign that lease after it's been negotiated. So that to me is a must-have that I recommend to everybody, is before you sign that final negotiated lease, you have an attorney review it. All right, so let's start to wrap it up. Is there anything else at a high level that you thought, no, Henry should have asked me about that, because I see it as a common mistake that small business owners make, especially when they're looking to get retail space? Anything else that we didn't cover that comes to mind?
There was one other item we didn't really touch on that I would like to kind of go in. I see this mistake pretty often, and it is, when do I need to start searching for MySpace?
Right.
Because
and when
a
do
lot
I
of
engage
times
you in it too,
Yeah, yes, yeah. Because a lot of times I will, we'll get started talking with a tenant on a property, and their response when I ask them, okay, what's your timing for occupancy, is, I needed it yesterday. That's not really a good position to be in from the tenant's perspective, for really, one of two reasons. First of all, whenever you're in a hurry, you lose all your leverage.
Yeah.
The landlord knows you have to be in a space, and, sure, you might be looking at some other properties, but if he can move quickly, he's got a good chance at making a deal, even if it's at some less competitive terms. Two, is the build out process tends to take quite a while. And if you're butting up against another lease, you could get stuck paying holdover rent at your other property, which is typically 150 to 200 times your current rate. So, you're getting you're paying twice as much rent on one end, and you're losing time in your new space on the other, because of a lack of failure to plan ahead of time. So I would typically recommend, if you're going to do a full build out on a space, maybe it's a shell space where it's just a concrete slab and an electrical panel. Landlord still needs to, you still need to do a HVAC. I would recommend at least 8 months for that full process. It's going to take you probably a couple 2 to 3 weeks to identify sites. You're going to have to go out and tour those sites. I would put another week and a half there, 3 to 4 weeks for negotiating an LOI, another 3 to 4 weeks for the lease. And then you could have, 4 to 6 months of build out if it's, pretty intensive. A lot of times if it's not very intensive, you can get it done under 90 days, but that'll kind of give you a timeline on, when you might want to get started on doing your search. It doesn't happen as fast as some people might want to believe.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's an excellent point. And that's been my experience as well, JP. Again, it could happen in 3 months. It could happen in 12 months. The last business that we launched, I think it probably took us about a year. So, and then when you add a variable like the finish out, well, goodness, especially nowadays, with how hard it is to get a contractor, especially if it's a smaller job. So yeah, that is, like you said, such a good point to make, that people wait too long and now they lose their leverage. And that's probably the biggest price you'll pay, besides probably not being able to get the doors open in time.
Right.
You lose your negotiating leverage, and that is going to cost you if you allow that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I've done a lease and done the whole process in less than 30 days, but the tenant doesn't get as stronger terms as they could. Not ideal. All right. If someone wants to chat with you and maybe potentially use your services, you specialize, obviously you're licensed in Texas and you specialize in the DFW area. Where should they go to learn more or to contact you? Sure. They can go to our website at advisorstx.com to learn a little bit more about what we do. We're a full service commercial real estate firm. So, I specialize in brokerage services, but, we do also have accounting and property management under our umbrella of services. We are also doing a little bit of development as well. So they can go to Advisors TX to learn a little bit more about who we are and what we do. All my contact information is there on the website. All right. So if I go to the website, then how do I find you specifically? So you would go to the website and there should be, there will be a tab at the very top that says the team. Then you'll see managing partners, Steve Gray, and then Philip Hooks is a partner in the, in our company. And then you'll see my name, JP Humphrey 3 down. You'll have to scroll a little bit. I'm there. I have my bio there. You can see my listings. Yeah, if you guys need any assistance in Dallas Fort Worth, I'd be happy to assist you guys with that. You have any other questions? Nope. That's it, JP. We're going to wrap it up. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with me today and helping me with all these questions. I appreciate your sharing your thoughts and your insights. Great to be with you guys. A lot of insightful questions, and it was a really good, engaging conversation. So thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. This is Henry Lopez, and thanks for joining me on this episode of The How of Business. My guest today again was JP Humphrey. I release new episodes every Monday morning, and you can find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at my website, thehowofbusiness.com. I'll also have a link there to find JP's site and his contact information. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to The How of Business. For more information about our coaching programs, online courses, show notes pages, links, and other resources, please visit thehowofbusiness.com.